Now, we peel back the bamboo blinds of history and quietly step into the cold stone corridor of the Tang Dynasty bureaucracy. Somewhere in the 7th century, deep within the imperial capital of Chang'an. You would never think that being a government official meant cold porridge, cramped lodging, and an ever-present fear of calligraphy mistakes. But here we are. The empire might be flourishing, the Grand Canal buzzing with commerce, and poetry blooming like peonies. But you're sleeping under a shared thatched roof with 2 other exam survivors, one of whom snores like a philosophical bear. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget, post your location and local time in the comments. Let's see who else is hiding in a bureaucratic fever dream. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake with a start. Not to an alarm clock, those are centuries away, but to the melodic creak of someone sharpening an ink brush across the room. You sit up on a mat, so thin you can feel the shape of the floor beneath it. Around you, scrolls are scattered like forgotten dreams. Your roommate mumbles something about tax grain quotas and rolls over. The chamber pot nearby reminds you that privacy is a modern luxury. The sun hasn't risen yet, but you already feel behind schedule. You reach for your writing slate and brush. Every day begins with note-taking, even before you've put on pants. Well, robes. But these are no cozy bathrobes. They're stiff ceremonial garments that wrinkle at the mere thought of movement. Dressing like a scholar is not an act of comfort. It's a pledge of suffering. There's a stale scent in the air. Fermented tofu, wet paper, and ambition. Someone is boiling tea in the corner, using a brazier. Technically, you all take turns buying the tea leaves, but you know the guy with the embroidered cuffs always forgets. You decide to skip breakfast, again. It's just rice porridge today anyway, with maybe a sliver of pickled vegetable if you're lucky, or unlucky, depending on the vegetable. Your shared quarters lie close to the Northern Ministry cluster. You're not in the rich part of Chang'an, but you can hear it. The clang of horse hooves on tiled roads, the distant chanting from a nearby temple, and always, the sound of someone arguing over the price of millet. It's a hard thing, starting the day knowing you are both indispensable and entirely replaceable. If you die today, someone will take your seat at the tax ledger by tomorrow morning, possibly sooner. There's a waiting list. Some of them are already practicing their handwriting in alleys. You remind yourself that you are a cog in a system praised by emperors and envied by foreign ambassadors. It's called lie, the Confucian ideal of ritual propriety. And this morning, Lee feels like stiff socks, a bitter aftertaste, and the quiet realization that the scroll you need is being used as a coaster by your roommate. Mainstream historical fact. The Tang civil service was indeed one of the most sophisticated in the world, laying down a foundation for merit-based administration that other empires try to emulate. Quirky fringe tidbit? Many junior officials, like you, lived together in shared dorms called Chang'an, which doubled as prep schools and unofficial gossip hubs. And historians still argue whether the daily grind of the bureaucracy was a noble system of merit or a soul-crushing labyrinth that crushed intellect under ink and anxiety. Either way, you stretch your sore legs, tuck your writing tools into your robe, and brace yourself for a day of controlled panic. You don't work with your hands, after all. You work with your mind, and it's already exhausted. You step into the morning light, which, for bureaucrats like you, is less sunrise and more of a soft interrogation lamp. The streets of Chang'an are waking up. Peddlers wheel carts of steaming buns past hunched monks sweeping temple steps. Couriers dash past in dust-smeared robes, scrolls tucked under arms like weapons of truth or lies, depending on the sender. And you're just trying not to trip on your too long hem as you shuffle toward the Ministry of Rights. You're not alone. Dozens of junior clerks and scribes clog the wide avenues like a very polite traffic jam. Everyone moves with that determined slouch of someone important but poorly paid. There's the usual mix of gossip, paper cuts and passive-aggressive throat clearing. A man in front of you is muttering a poem under his breath, trying to calm his nerves before presenting a border tax report. Behind you, someone sneezes. Twice. You silently recite the Tao Te Ching to prevent yourself from imagining it's plague season again. At the gates of the ministry, your badge is checked by a guard who looks like he hasn't blinked since the last lunar eclipse. He grunts. You nod. This is your warmest interaction today. Inside the compound, things get worse. The office is freezing despite the morning sun. The walls are lined with shelves holding scrolls so old they probably remember Empress Wu as that charming young upstart. You take your seat on a mat that always manages to find the one pebble no one can remove. It's time to copy tax records, again. By hand, ink brush, no mistakes. Mistakes mean a new scroll. New scrolls mean begging the supply officer, who is definitely still mad about that ink spill 2 weeks ago. You dip your brush, hand trembling slightly, and begin. Prefecture of Yue, rice production, 6,000 du. You stop. Someone coughs dramatically behind you. It's your supervisor, Minister Liu, a man whose only joy in life is pointing out faint smudges and making you feel like you've dishonored your ancestors. He peers over your shoulder like a calligraphy hawk. You adjust your brush grip and pretend you haven't developed a stress twitch in your left eye. Lunch arrives late, as always. It's millet gruel today. Again. You chew it slowly, thinking of the poet Li Bai, who probably never wrote odes to soggy grains. Although, knowing Li Bai, he might have romanticized it into golden clouds floating in a silent bowl. You stare at your spoon. It's not golden. It's splintered. Someone near you brings up a rumor. A new official was demoted for lack of filial piety. Apparently, he forgot to send a New Year scroll to his mother. Historians still argue whether this rule was ever enforced systematically or just used when the palace needed a reason to ruin someone's week. You return to your desk, where another document waits for transcription. The form is so convoluted, it might as well be a riddle wrapped in a poem wrapped in bureaucracy. It's supposed to help determine village labor quotas. In reality, it just helps people determine the limits of their patience. You sigh, you write, you rewrite. The brush slips. You curse softly in classical Chinese. The day blurs into brush strokes and numeric conversions. Your hand cramps. Someone offers you fermented bean curd as a snack. You accept it because this is your life now. The Tang Dynasty may be a golden age of art, literature, and international diplomacy, but inside these ministry walls, it's more like a paper-cut renaissance with a side of existential dread. You were promised the honor of serving the empire. What you got was this ink-stained scroll and a roommate who talks in his sleep about barley prices. You survive the afternoon, but barely. The sun slips lower in the sky, casting long shadows over your stack of not yet approved reports. You gather them with the urgency of someone trying not to be noticed. Because if you're noticed, you'll be handed another set of documents, probably involving land disputes between monks and melon farmers. Those ones never end well. No one wins when melons and karma collide. You tuck the scrolls under your arm and make your way to the evening debrief, an informal but spiritually exhausting ritual where junior clerks are summoned to listen to a senior official recap the day's minor chaos. Today's recap is hosted by Deputy Director Zhao, who treats punctuation like a rumor and speech pauses like a personal failing. You stand, nod, and occasionally murmur, "Indeed," while wondering whether anyone's ever fallen asleep standing up during a tax policy sermon. As he drones on about grain permits and ghost entries in the household registry, your mind wanders. Not to dreams of fame or wealth. No, that would be too poetic. You just want your sandal strap to stop digging into your heel. You shuffle your foot. It digs deeper. You wonder if there's a Tang Dynasty phrase for mildly haunted shoe. Dismissed at last, you head out into the darkening street. Nightfall in Chang'an doesn't mean peace. It means a second shift of social obligation. First, there's the matter of guanxi, networking, Tang style. You make your way to a modest tea house where three colleagues are waiting with cups of warm chrysanthemum tea and expressions of thinly veiled fatigue. The conversation is predictable. Someone got promoted, someone got reassigned to the far north, someone's cousin might marry into a merchant family. You nod, you sip, you drop hints about your calligraphy excellence, hoping the right person passes it along. You would never think that sipping lukewarm tea while praising someone's nephew's poetry could be the key to a career-defining appointment, but here you are. Historians still argue whether the Tang bureaucracy was truly meritocratic or just an elaborate improv show for middle-class scholars with decent brushwork. The real joy of these nights, though, is not the tea. It's the gossip. You learn that Minister Liu allegedly owns a painting of himself dressed as an immortal and makes his servants bow to it. You learn that one scribe was caught forging signatures to buy more dumplings. You also learn that no one likes being the last to leave because the host will remember it, and next time you'll be the one buying tea. You finally exit with a polite bow and head home under a moon that feels slightly judgmental. The streets have emptied, except for a noodle vendor still ladling broth under a lantern. You stop and buy a bowl. It's salty. It's questionable. It's perfect. At home, one room, two mats, one indifferent roommate. You fold your robes and rub your cramped hands. There's a stack of poetry by your pillow. Not for pleasure, of course. You're preparing for the next round of the civil exam. Again. Because even once you're in the bureaucracy, the ladder never ends. Each rung is greased with etiquette, memorization, and fear of misquoting Confucius. Your roommate sneezes. Again. You sigh. You've read that sneezing at night is bad luck. Or maybe it's just bad hygiene. Either way, you roll onto your side, press your scroll of Confucian aphorisms to your cheek like a soft, emotionally confusing pillow, and close your eyes. One day you'll rise through the ranks, maybe even wear colored silk, maybe even sit down during meetings. But for now, you dream of melons and karma and ink that never runs dry. You wake to the gentle thump of your roommate kicking over the wash basin again. There is no alarm clock, only muscle memory, anxiety, and the faint crow of a rooster who has probably never seen a field in his life. You splash your face with cold water that feels like melted disappointment, and you're reminded again that Tang Dynasty plumbing consists mostly of hope and gravity. Your first task today? Not enlightenment, not even justice. It's transcribing regional weather reports. Yes, the Empire tracks rainfall, and yes, it's your job to convert some courier's chicken scratch about muddy rice paddies into elegant characters that make the Emperor feel in control of the clouds. The irony is that you haven't seen a rice paddy in a decade, but you make it sound poetic, like the heavens gently weep over Chinjo. You'd think a day spent doing calligraphy would be serene. It is not. The inkstone won't grind evenly. The brush is frayed. Your seat is at the perfect height to compress your spine, but not your ambition. You adjust your robes so many times they start to resemble origami. And of course, halfway through a perfectly copied line, someone slams the door and startles your brush, transforming the character for abundance into something that looks more like mild chaos. Mid-morning brings a change of pace, a message from the Records Bureau. A mistake was discovered in last month's census figures, and naturally, it's your department's job to correct it. By hand. One by one. You're given a stack of bamboo slips and the emotional equivalent of a slap. The good news? You get to use red ink. The bad news? It stains everything and makes you look like you murdered a scholar for lunch. As you work, your superior walks past and offers feedback in the form of a single raised eyebrow. This is both your performance review and your annual wellness check. You try to sit straighter. You forget how spines work. You blink twice in Morse code at your friend across the aisle. He blinks back. Same. Just when you think it can't get more mind-numbing, there's a call for all clerks to attend a moral refinement lecture in the hall. Ah, yes. Nothing like being lectured about virtue by a man whose belt is more expensive than your entire wardrobe. He talks about modesty, He talks about filial piety. He talks about controlling your desires while sipping wine he found in the office kitchen. Historians still argue whether these lectures were effective tools of discipline or simply a passive-aggressive way to keep bureaucrats too tired to revolt. You, however, use them to practice the art of sleeping with your eyes open. It's a skill passed down through generations of civil servants. The afternoon resumes with a brief assignment summarizing the imperial edicts from yesterday, which, of course, you weren't allowed to read directly. So, you summarize a summary of a paraphrase of a vague whisper that might have come from someone who once saw an edict. Accuracy is optional. Elegance is mandatory. The day ends, not with satisfaction, but with a second wind of paperwork handed out just in case someone checks. You realize your entire job is essentially historical insulation, cushioning the emperor from the reality of rural floods, corrupt prefects, and that one rogue goat population near Chengdu. By dusk, your brush hand is cramping into a claw, your back aches like you've been carved into a scholar-shaped statue, and your eyes burn from hours of not blinking while pretending to read. You step outside, bow to a senior clerk with a smile that's 80% survival instinct, and return home. Another day spent doing everything and understanding nothing. Still, you whisper your dream aloud. Maybe tomorrow I'll be assigned to poetry reviews. And even your roommate laughs. You would think that dinner might be a reward for enduring another day lost in bureaucracy, but no. Dinner is a performance. Not a meal, not a moment of rest. Just another delicate ritual in the grand ballet of Tang Dynasty survival. You sit cross-legged on a woven mat that somehow makes your knees ache in places you didn't know had joints, staring at your rice bowl like it owes you money. The rice is cold, the pickled vegetables are colder, and the dried fish might just be a bookmark from an old Confucian text. You chew with the resigned determination of someone trying to eat their way out of a life choice. The good news: no one poisoned it today. The bad news: you're pretty sure your intestines are staging a protest anyway. Now, etiquette. You don't slurp. You don't talk with your mouth full. You don't express opinions about the food unless you want to be labeled unsophisticated. Instead, you nod appreciatively at your host's offering of radish soup and whisper, "Divine." Which is ironic, since it tastes like it's been blessed by a ghost with no palate. Historians still argue whether meals in lower official households were genuinely austere or just performed that way to signal humility. You know better. You know there's no act. You've scraped the bottom of that rice pot so often it now has emotional scars. There's also the hierarchy at the table. Senior clerks sit closest to the heat source. You, junior status incarnate, are practically dining in the hallway. You can smell the warmth of the stew, but never quite reach it. This, you've learned, is metaphor. The closer you get to power, the more flavor you're allowed. After the meal, everyone nods thoughtfully about poetry or the weather, pretending that you aren't all just exhausted civil servants in itchy robes wishing someone would invent a couch. One man recites a verse about the moon's reflection in a bowl of soup. Someone sighs. Someone else pretends to understand it. You just focus on not falling asleep mid-haiku. And then comes the tea, or rather, the tea-like substance. It's made from roasted millet husks and regret. You hold the bowl, sip politely, and wonder whether your tongue will forgive you. It does not. But you still drink it, because refusing would be rude, and Tang Dynasty etiquette values politeness far more than personal happiness. Once the dishes are cleared away, by you, obviously, because junior clerks are the medieval version of interns, you retreat to your corner. And here comes the ritual of robe folding. Robes must be folded just so, or else they'll wrinkle and betray your internal chaos. You fold them. You refold them. You try not to cry. Sleep doesn't come immediately. Not because of noise, but because your mind is still rehearsing your superior's eyebrow from earlier. Was it criticism, approval, sarcasm, or worse, pity? You may never know. The Tang Dynasty didn't invent HR. And just as your eyes begin to close, you remember. Tomorrow's the 5th day of the lunar cycle, which means early temple offerings and double paperwork. You groan into your pillow, a wooden block with ambition, and let exhaustion swallow your rebellion. Remember the cold radish soup. It tasted like melancholy, and yet somehow that was the highlight. You wake up with a crick in your neck and the unsettling realization that you dreamed about ink. Not dragons, not riches, ink. You've been fully absorbed into the Tang bureaucracy, body and soul. Breakfast is half a stale bun and a sip of lukewarm barley broth, which is somehow both too sour and too bland. But it's not food that makes your stomach sink. It's what comes next. Scrolls. Not just any scrolls. These are reports from sub-prefects, tax summaries, agricultural tallies, and a glorious, never-ending stream of bureaucratic correspondences that must be read, annotated, approved, or quietly lost, depending on who sent them. This is your day now. Endless loops of brush, stamp, and string. The desk you sit at is somehow both too high and too splintered. Your inkstone is cracked in the corner. The brush hairs keep clumping together like they, too, are trying to unionize. One mainstream historical fact that keeps you going. Tang administration was one of the most sophisticated in early medieval history, with regional coordination that rivals some modern states, which makes it sound a lot better than it feels. Here's the part that no one tells you about joining the civil service. No one reads the documents you agonize over, or if they do, they skim for red seals and power signals. So you spend an hour carefully composing a 500-character report on regional millet quotas, only for it to be summarized aloud in front of a superior as "farmer yields acceptable, next." You do not cry, you just breathe. Historians still argue whether bureaucrats of your level had any true influence or were merely human fax machines with delusions of grandeur. You know the answer. You are a very tired, very hungry transmission device. The ink on your fingers might as well be part of your skin by now. At mid-morning, a senior official sends you a casual inquiry. Could you summarize the last 3 years of grain policies from the Southwest Province? By noon, you smile the way a person smiles when the roof collapses on their dignity. Then you sprint, respectfully, to the archive vault, which smells like mold and forgotten ambition. There, you face the real challenge of the Tang Dynasty: handwriting. Every clerk has their own style, ranging from poetic brushstrokes to what can only be described as bird footprints in a windstorm. Deciphering these scrolls isn't just difficult, it's spiritual, like trying to interpret tea leaves that actively resent you. You scribble notes, your fingers cramp, your wrist feels like it's made of noodles. One quirky detail you learn as you go. Some bureaucrats, to save time, developed shorthand symbols that only they could understand. You stumble on one that looks like a grumpy turtle and suspect it means increased tax or this is dumb but approved. Just before the noon bell, you rush back, cheeks flushed, robe askew, scrolls clutched in your aching arms. Your superior raises one eyebrow, a skill they've clearly practiced in the mirror. You hand over the summary, bow twice, and try not to collapse. He skims it, nods once, says, "Adequate." That's it. Not "thank you," not "well done." Just adequate. It is somehow the most devastating word you've ever heard. Lunch is coming. You hope it's more than radish water. You hope you get to chew something. But more than that, you hope someone makes a mistake soon. Because correcting their grammar is the only joy you have left. Lunch is an event that promises everything and delivers precisely nothing. You shuffle into the canteen behind 50 other ink-stained souls, the scent of boiled cabbage and despair already curling in your nostrils. You sit at a long wooden table that wobbles like it's made of cooked noodles, and you try not to make eye contact with the clerk across from you, who is already halfway through sucking a mysterious grey soup off his sleeve. Your bowl arrives. It's millet gruel. Again. And on the side, a pickle that looks like it's already digested itself. But complaining is for those with options, and you gave those up the moment you passed the imperial exam. so you stir your lunch and try to convince yourself it's textured. Mainstream history would remind you that Tang bureaucracy had official food allotments, and many clerks received cooked meals at government expense. What it leaves out is that government expense often translated to whatever didn't go rotten this week. Your gruel could legally be classified as glue, and your pickle has achieved sentience. By mid-afternoon, you're back at your desk, and your stomach still growling. Not from hunger, but in protest. You have a new assignment. Copy a 6-page memorandum word for word onto silk, in preparation for delivery to a provincial magistrate. Your brush trembles, not from fatigue, but because the silk ripples every time you exhale wrong. You hold your breath like you're defusing a bomb and hope your ink doesn't bleed. The absurdity of your task is overwhelming. You're writing on a fabric most people can't afford to touch, just to relay a message that says, in summary, "We disapprove of your choices. Please make different ones." Historians still argue whether Tang bureaucracy valued substance or style more, but this, surely, is the ultimate tie. As you labor, you overhear a few colleagues chatting in hushed tones. One tells of a clerk who disguised satire as bureaucratic commentary and accidentally got promoted. Another claims a fellow scribe went blind from reading one too many tax records. You laugh, softly, not because it's funny, but because you know you're next. By late afternoon, you're summoned to assist at a public records review. This involves unrolling 10-meter-long scrolls, smoothing them out with weighted stones, and pretending to find a rhythm in language so repetitive it might have been generated by a sleep-deprived parrot. Your role is to nod and occasionally say, "Yes, that matches the previous record." You don't know if it does, but neither does anyone else. A fringe tidbit floats to mind. Some Tang-era administrators were known to mark the margins of documents with poems, riddles, or insults, both to entertain themselves and to insult the reader, depending on the tone. You begin to suspect the poem you found earlier wasn't a verse of praise, but a bureaucratic curse. You feel seen. As dusk creeps through the lattice windows, you seal your final scroll with a blob of vermilion paste and press it with your personal chop. It's a small square carved with your name. You used to be proud of it. Now it feels more like a barcode, something that says, "This human belongs to paperwork." You return to your sleeping mat with stiff fingers and aching shoulders. One more day survived, one less illusion about the grandeur of civil service. You lie down, eyes burning, heart heavy. But hey, your calligraphy has improved. You wake up the next morning to the sound of sandals slapping stone and a bell ringing to signal morning assembly. But your body doesn't move, because today is punishment day. Not for you, at least not directly, but for someone in your department. And you, lucky soul that you are, have been invited to witness the glory of Tang disciplinary proceedings. The courtyard is already filling. Clerks form rows like a forest of hunched willows, their robes still damp from the morning mist. A supervisor reads out the charges. Excessive ink wastage, sloppily drawn strokes, and, for the brave soul currently kneeling in the dirt, unauthorized satire in an official report. His crime? Writing, as clear as mud, "Your Grace," in a commentary on tax law. You would never think that bureaucracy could be dangerous. But the truth is, saying the wrong thing in a poetic tone might land you under house arrest. Or worse, reassignment to border inspection duties in mosquito country. Historians still argue whether the Tang government used creative expression to enhance official reports, or if it just made it easier to know who to punish. After the ceremony, you slink back to your desk, grateful that your own rebellious haikus remain hidden in your ink-stained drawer. It's safer that way. Midday brings you to another task, just as delightful: managing incoming petitions from rural prefectures. These are handwritten by people who believe, falsely, that the empire has time to solve their neighbor's chicken theft or irrigation squabbles. Your job is not to solve the petitions. Your job is to sort them by tone, handwriting legibility, and number of idioms used. The most floridly written ones get bumped up. The factual ones get burned. Your colleague leans over and whispers that he's developed a point system. 2 points for metaphors, 1 for flattery, -3 for complaints about local governors. He shows you a petition that starts with, "The wind howls through my village like injustice through the hollow bones of the state." You both agree it's a 10 out of 10. By now, your hand cramps permanently into a claw. You massage it with your ink-dusted sleeve and wonder, briefly, how many years this job shaves off your life. A mainstream fact you remember from orientation. Tang clerks often began their careers at 16 and retired by 60, assuming they didn't die first from liver failure, paper cuts, or ennui. A lovely life arc if your definition of excitement includes scroll storage and stamp allocation. The fringe detail? One Tang-era official apparently bribed astrologers to predict a comet so he could take a vacation. The comet never showed up, but the astrologers were promoted. You, meanwhile, just got asked to inventory 300 scrolls and alphabetize them by stroke count. By twilight, you're summoned again, this time to assist with Dragon Day preparations. That's when the Emperor ceremonially reviews merit lists and every department tries to look efficient and virtuous, which means banners. You are now writing slogans on silk banners like "Loyal hearts bear fruit" and "Discipline is the ink of prosperity." You pause at one, unsure how to spell prosperity in seal script. No one answers. The supervisor tells you to just make it look confident. As you carry the banners to the storage hall, a sudden gust of wind lifts one of them out of your hands and into a pond. You stare at it as it sinks, watching your careful brushwork dissolve into ancient bureaucracy soup. You whisper to yourself, "Just make it look confident," and keep walking. The night falls slowly over the city of Chang'an, blanketing red-tiled roofs in a quiet hush that doesn't quite reach the offices of the Ministry of Rights, where you're still hunched over, transcribing a treatise on etiquette, because nothing screams bedtime like the proper bowing angle at a tea banquet. You blink hard, twice, as your lamp flickers. Is this the part where you quietly pass away at your desk, entombed by paperweights? You straighten up and look around. Everyone else is still here. One clerk is snoring lightly, face planted in a scroll. Another is using the silence to sneak in some calligraphy practice, drawing increasingly elaborate characters for grace and retirement. You want to ask him which of those he thinks will come first. In theory, your work ends at sunset. In practice, your supervisor ends your work. And tonight, she's decided it's a fine time to proofread every seal used by every deputy in the last lunar quarter. You hold up one, shaped like a tiny turtle, and she nods grimly. That's the Minister of Grain. He likes turtles. You return to your desk with the tiny turtle, because yes, that's your life now. But wait, there's more. Just when you think the night is safe, a courier arrives, panting and wild-eyed, carrying a crimson scroll marked urgent. Everyone stiffens. Urgent means someone in court mispronounced a diplomatic name or wore the wrong brocade, and now 3 ministries need to cover it up before the Emperor finds out. You're dragged into a midnight committee. It's you, your half-asleep supervisor, a guy from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs who smells like fish, and someone whose only job seems to be frowning deeply. For 2 hours, you all try to figure out how to spin His Excellency the Envoy of Silk into esteemed thread collector of heaven. Somehow, you succeed. Barely. The frowning man grunts. Good enough. The Emperor doesn't read. You finally stumble out into the courtyard. It's almost dawn again. You haven't bathed in days. You smell like candle wax and despair. You don't even remember what you ate last. Was it the pickled radish or the shredded cabbage, delightfully described as monk's treasure, but tasting like old scroll paste? And still, you survive. That's the secret. You don't survive the Tang bureaucracy by excelling. You survive by existing quietly, writing clearly, and never, ever drawing attention. Historians still argue whether Tang officials were noble Confucian exemplars or glorified paper herders. You're leaning toward the latter, but you're too tired to footnote it. You crawl into your sleeping mat behind a filing cabinet. A moth dances near your lamp. You mutter a final haiku. Ink on fingertips, mandates rustle like dry leaves. Sleep eludes again. The moth lands on your nose. You don't care. You dream of being a farmer instead. Just rice paddies and frogs and maybe one petition a year that no one reads. Sounds like paradise. Now we slip behind the silk curtain of time where spice-scented winds brush across Istanbul's crowded alleys and the muezzin's call echoes off marble domes as you, yes, you, are grabbed by the Ottoman Empire's most elaborate talent scout system. You would never think that being one of the empire's most feared warriors starts with having your childhood interrupted by tax collectors with suspiciously large measuring tapes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it there? You're about 10 years old and you've just been selected through the Dev Shermi system, an elite-sounding phrase that actually means, congratulations, your village lost the weirdest lottery. Ottoman officials arrive in your town with clipboards and decide you'd look great in uniform. Historians still argue whether this practice was a form of benevolent uplift or state-sanctioned child relocation with a haircut. Either way, you don't get to pack. Goodbye, Mum. Goodbye, wooden goat toy. And goodbye to any name that sounds remotely Slavic, Albanian, or Greek. You're now given a Turkish name, a crash course in Islam, and a new identity faster than a witness in a mafia trial. If you're lucky, you get sent to a farm for a few years to toughen up, essentially an Ottoman version of military preschool featuring hay beds and unsupervised cows. You're told this is a great honor. You're part of the Sultan's household, which sounds like you're about to pour tea and fluff pillows, but really means your body now belongs to the state, forever. And unlike most jobs that say full-time commitment, they actually mean it. Everything changes. Your old clothes are burned. You get a uniform made from scratchy fabric that smells like someone else's sweat from 2 provinces over. You're taught Turkish, calligraphy, and how not to blink during sword practice. Historians still debate whether the Janissary intake was more about indoctrination or survival skills disguised as poetry lessons. You're hoping it's mostly the latter. There's discipline. So much discipline. And silence. No crying, no questioning, no joking, unless it's in perfect Ottoman Turkish and preferably flattering to the Sultan. Any tears you shed are collected by metaphorical scrolls of state loyalty. One boy next to you tries to run. He's now running laps instead, forever, on one leg. And then there's the food, gruel. It tastes like it sounds, grey, lukewarm, and emotionally unavailable. It's served in wooden bowls that look suspiciously like reused helmets. There's also soup, always soup, possibly pigeon soup. No one asks, because asking leads to extra drills, and drills mean you miss the one semi-warm part of the soup cycle. Still, something odd happens. You start adapting. Your shoulders square off. Your calligraphy stops looking like chicken tracks. And one day, you wake up and realize you haven't thought about your old name in weeks. It's not that you've forgotten, just that it's been drowned out by marching rhythms, shouted commands, and the sound of your own footsteps joining the thunderous pulse of empire. You rise before dawn, not because you're a morning person, but because being a janissary is the historical equivalent of being permanently on call. The barracks echo with the scratchy shuffle of sandals and the subtle dread of breakfast. You line up with military precision next to hundreds of others who, like you, are now matching puzzle pieces in the Sultan's personal jigsaw. This is Topkapi Palace, part training ground, part royal maze, and part psychological experiment. You share dormitories with your fellow janissaries, which means no privacy, no alone time, and absolutely no snoring unless you want to be force-fed a sandal. Historians still argue whether the janissary barracks fostered camaraderie or quietly encouraged competitive misery. You train for hours. There are no gym selfies, no protein powders, and certainly no personal trainers with motivational slogans. You train with swords that weigh more than your torso, run in circles until the circles blur into spirals, and practice marching like you're auditioning for a sentient metronome. Combat drills are merciless. You learn to load a musket with fingers so fast they'd impress a 21st century barista. You practice archery until your arms feel like detachable limbs. There's wrestling too, not the fun kind with glitter and announcers. This is the kind that leaves you with bruises in places you didn't know existed. One quirky Janissary tradition? Wrestling with oil. Yes, you are greased up and expected to grapple. It's less dangerous warrior and more violent slip and slide. And it's not just muscles you're training. The Janissary Corps is terrifyingly literate. You copy passages of law, recite Sufi poetry, and learn court etiquette so complex it makes royal table manners look like caveman grunting. The elite among you even study philosophy, because nothing says battle-ready like pondering metaphysics while holding a scimitar. Then there's the choir practice. Yes, the military choir. Because in the Ottoman Empire, conquering cities and harmonizing in three-part melody are both signs of discipline. You don't sing because you want to. You sing because the Sultan might be listening, and if you go off-key, it might be your final solo. You're watched constantly, not just by your instructors, but by each other. Spying is baked into the culture like stale bread. If your bunkmate slacks off, you report them. If you do something clever, they report you. This constant surveillance breeds a sort of cautious efficiency. You do everything perfectly, just fast enough not to look smug. Historians still debate whether Janissary discipline came from internal conviction or fear of being replaced by someone with slightly straighter posture. Either way, it works. Your body becomes a weapon. Your mind becomes a ledger. And your soul, well, that's filed somewhere between state property and missing. By the time dusk falls, your legs feel like timber stilts, and your brain is a sponge full of sword positions and memorized proverbs. You don't even collapse into bed. You fold, neatly, because even unconsciousness must be orderly. Outside, the muezzin sings again. You hear it through a haze, and tomorrow you'll rise once more, greased, drilled, silent, and one day closer to marching into history. You're not just a soldier, you're a symbol. That sounds exciting until you realize that symbols don't get days off. The Janissaries are the Sultan's walking propaganda, which means your uniform has to look sharp enough to slice bread, even if you haven't eaten any in 3 days. And yes, there is a correct angle for how your plume sits on your felt cap. Fashion, it turns out, is mandatory. You march in formation down the streets of Constantinople, stoic, symmetrical, and slightly sleep-deprived. The locals don't just stare, they inspect. Your existence is meant to inspire awe and remind every merchant, noble, or goat herder that the Sultan has a personal army who can pirouette in armor. Historians still argue whether the Janissaries' public parades were effective intimidation or just bureaucratic cosplay. Your role includes ceremonial duties, from standing guard at official banquets to quietly glaring at diplomats. You're required to master the art of not blinking. One false move, one twitch, and someone will write a complaint scroll in triplicate. And yes, someone is always watching. Ottoman decorum is less about dignity and more about silence in the face of absurdity. When the Sultan travels, you follow. Not on horseback, of course. That's reserved for nobles and their decorative moustaches. You walk, miles and miles, in tight formation, through mud, heat, or the occasional suspiciously angry goose. You carry his belongings, guard the treasury, and set up camp faster than most people can boil water. You are both elite soldier and royal luggage handler. But it's not all grim marches and suspicious poultry. Sometimes you get assigned as palace guard. That's where the real perks sneak in. Gilded tiles, cool shade, and the chance to overhear the drama of the imperial harem from exactly 10 meters away, and never closer, unless you enjoy being exiled into a swamp. One fringe benefit: the food. On guard duty, You occasionally get kitchen leftovers, and let's just say roasted lamb with pomegranate beats the usual barley stew that tastes like humid despair. Still, power is addictive. The Janissaries begin to see themselves not as humble servants of the Sultan, but as stakeholders in his success. Some even dabble in politics, whispering into the ears of viziers or leveraging their loyalty for favors. One quirky historical tidbit: Janissaries were known to make or break sultans. If enough of them disliked a ruler, well, let's just say early retirement wasn't always voluntary. Historians still debate whether this creeping influence was the core's fatal flaw or its evolutionary strength. Either way, you feel it. Every time you're bowed to in public, every time you catch a noble avoiding your gaze, you're not just part of the machine, you are the machine. And for now, it purrs smoothly. At night, the barracks buzz with coded chatter. Who got promoted? Who got punished? Who's missing? You learn to listen with your eyebrows and speak with silence. Because sometimes survival means keeping your mouth shut and your uniform ironed. You wake to a horn blast that feels like it's been shoved directly into your soul. Training day. Again. As a Janissary, your elite status does not exempt you from relentless drills. Quite the opposite. You're trained harder than the average conscript because you're supposed to be more than a soldier. You're a precision weapon, a walking discipline poster. The day begins with formation practice. Marching in unison is oddly harder than combat. At least in combat, you're allowed to sweat and blink. Then it's archery, with those recurved Ottoman bows that look like art and feel like self-inflicted injury when you pull them wrong. One historical fact to soothe your aching arms. Janissary archers were among the most skilled in the world, able to strike targets at 400 meters with unnerving accuracy. You think that's impressive until it's time for musket drills. Firearms are becoming the cool new thing, and the Janissaries are among the first professional troops to use them widely. So now you train with matchlocks that are equal parts weapon and mood killer. They weigh as much as your sense of dread and ignite with all the reliability of damp toast. One misfire and you get an instructor's glare that could shatter porcelain. Lunch is barley and dried fig. Again, the fig's the best part, which is saying something, considering it tastes like chewy sadness. You eat in silence, shoulder to shoulder, while everyone pretends not to stare at the guy who got a slightly bigger scoop. In the Janissary Corps, fairness is a science, and minor food envy is practically a bonding ritual. After lunch, hand-to-hand combat. Your opponent is twice your size and angry about something he won't talk about. Probably socks. Janissary socks are legendary, not for comfort, but for their ability to vanish right before winter. You dodge, block, get thrown, and land face first in dust that smells like 1,000 generations of crushed dreams. Again, the instructor mutters, as if your cartilage is just optional. One lesser-known historical tidbit. Janissaries didn't just train to kill, they trained to not kill, practicing restraint, discipline, and sometimes even ethics, on Wednesdays, if the moon was right. They were forbidden from marrying for most of their careers, weren't allowed to grow beards early on, and were expected to remain loyal only to the Sultan. You belong to the state now, in every way that matters. By evening, your body is basically a protest song. You limp to the baths, one of the few pleasures available. The steam, the quiet, the brief illusion that your kneecaps still work. You sit, surrounded by other battered elites, too tired to talk, but comforted by the mutual understanding that nobody here remembers what fun feels like. Scholars still argue whether this level of institutional discipline made the Janissaries stronger or simply more repressed. You return to barracks with that special stiffness only ancient military life can offer. Your mattress is thin, your pillow thinner, but your exhaustion is thick enough to carry you through. You close your eyes knowing full well that tomorrow brings the exact same drill schedule. Good night, elite warrior of an empire. And try not to dream of musket recoil. You're dreaming of warm bread and a bed that doesn't squeak like a haunted cupboard when the shout comes. Time to move. The Janissary Corps isn't just a training ground. it's a deployable tool. The Sultan clicks, and the whole machine turns. And now, it's pointing you toward the Balkans. You travel in a military column so large, it looks like a logistical nightmare wrapped in an identity crisis. There are camel caravans carrying spare arrows, gold-trimmed tents for officers, oxen dragging cannons that are as subtle as thunder, and somewhere in there, your own aching feet. Your boots gave up halfway through Anatolia. Your dignity tapped out even earlier. Travel is less epic odyssey and more moving village with discipline issues. One mainstream historical fact: Janissaries weren't just fighters, they were also mobile administrators, bodyguards, and occasional tax enforcers. You're technically invading and managing at the same time. It's like being both the fire and the insurance. You sleep under canvas that leaks every time the sky has an opinion. Your rations are a cheerful blend of salted meat, vinegar, and regret. But the officers eat well, and sometimes, if you stare at their food long enough, one of them throws you a crust just to make you go away. Teamwork. There's also the matter of logistics, something surprisingly advanced for the time. Ottoman supply chains stretch like threads through the empire, linking provinces to armies with a precision that might even impress a modern accountant. Still, you don't get the good stuff. The flour meant for janissaries tends to disappear somewhere between imperial storehouse and local corrupt official's cousin's cousin. The fringe detail of the day? Some janissary units brought musicians into battle, not to distract, but to terrify. The Mater band is the original heavy metal. Massive drums, screeching zurnas, and synchronized stomping that announces, "Hi, yes, we're here to conquer you, and we brought our own soundtrack." You're marching to chaos music while praying for ankle support. Between marches, you help enforce order in newly taken cities. The locals are less than thrilled to see you. You don't speak the language, and your uniform makes you look like someone who definitely confiscates wine. You try to smile, but one tooth is loose from training, and the effect is more bandit mascot than diplomat. As you set up camp again, a veteran mutters about when campaigns meant glory, then coughs so hard his armor shifts. You nod solemnly, pretending you too remember the imaginary golden days. The truth? You've been carrying a broken pot handle for 3 days because no one's had time to resupply mess gear. Historians still argue whether these campaigns were more about strategic brilliance or sheer momentum. The Janissary Corps wasn't just a fighting force, it was an idea, projected with boots, muskets, and the vague promise of imperial prestige. You lie back on a bedroll that smells like mildew and homesickness. The stars above are bright, uncaring, and very much not interested in your lower back pain. You miss the baths, you miss the training ground, you even miss the fig. Because at least in Istanbul, your pillow didn't have beetles. Your marching days are behind you, for now. The campaign has ended, victory banners have been raised, and your bones are singing a dirge of quiet rebellion. You return to the capital, hoping for a little well-earned rest, maybe a promotion, or at least a uniform that doesn't smell like a soup kitchen for rats. Instead, you're sent straight into barracks life, the social experiment that never ends. You now live with hundreds of men, all crammed together like an angry, underpaid orchestra. There is snoring. There is snoring with vibrato. There are smells that defy classification, ancient cheese, boiling socks, and something that might once have been fish. You build immunity the same way you build muscle, painfully and under pressure. The barracks are a paradox. Technically elite, practically overcrowded. Every moment is either meticulously regulated or spontaneously chaotic. One mainstream historical fact: Janissary barracks in Istanbul, such as the famed Eski Odalar, old chambers, were not just places to sleep. They were administrative and educational hubs. You study math, calligraphy, religion, and military theory, which sounds impressive until you realize you're doing it half awake, sitting on a splintering bench with a guy behind you humming war songs through his nose. There is a hierarchy here. Seniors hold court like grumpy monarchs. You fetch water, shine boots, deliver messages, and pretend not to hear whispered insults about your posture. The tiniest mistake, misfolded sash, uneven beard trim, could earn you a week's worth of kitchen duty. And yes, the rumor is true. If you burn the rice, you eat it, alone. You're expected to remain celibate, technically, spiritually. But the rules are a little blurry in practice, and even blurrier after payday. The Janissaries receive regular salaries, often higher than civilian soldiers. A quirky tidbit? Some Janissaries use their income to buy shops, invest in land, or fund theatre troupes. That's right. You might be standing next to a musket-toting real estate mogul with a side hustle in shadow puppets. Of course, not all income is legal. Gambling thrives here, disguised as dice-based spiritual reflection. And everyone knows someone who smuggles saffron in boot linings. You try to stay clean, or at least plausibly deniable. You practice drills daily. Formations, musket handling, synchronized marching, because nothing says discipline like 30 men trying to reload in unison without dropping their powder flasks. There's always that one guy who fires early and pretends it was a test. Historians still argue whether the Janissaries' tight-knit barrack culture strengthened cohesion or encouraged internal cliques that later eroded their discipline. For now, it just feels like a high school where everyone has weapons. At night, you sneak to the roof. The city stretches beneath you, glittering domes, sleepy alleys, spice-laced winds drifting in from the markets. You hear a muezzin's call echo between the mosques. You also hear two guys below arguing about who stole whose laundry line. You close your eyes. You dream of things that make sense. Clean spoons, a dry floor, a conversation that doesn't involve a bayonet. But you're a Janissary now. Elite, feared, famous, and apparently forever behind on laundry duty. Now, you're not just a soldier, you're a political pawn. Congratulations, you've been promoted from expendable battlefield meat to potential kingmaker with access to petty drama. A promotion in the Janissary Corps doesn't just mean better armor or sharper boots, it means stepping directly into a bureaucratic lava pit with paperwork that bites and rivals who smile like vipers. The Empire runs on paperwork. Paperwork wrapped in formality, seasoned with duplicity, and garnished with mild paranoia. You're now expected to understand and uphold Qanun, the Sultan's secular law, while also respecting Sharia law. Easy. Just memorize 1,200 legal clauses and never blink wrong in front of a judge. As a senior Janissary, you become part of the Esnaf, official guild-like networks. You no longer only fight, you represent social order. Your opinion might actually matter, but don't get too smug. One wrong alliance and you're sleeping next to the latrine with no toothbrush privileges. Here comes the mainstream historical fact. The Janissary Corps became deeply entangled in Ottoman politics during the 17th and 18th centuries. They influenced tax policy, crowned and deposed sultans, and occasionally staged dramatic uprisings that historians like to politely call power renegotiations. You're just trying to survive a budget meeting without getting reassigned to Albania. Internal factions grow louder. Some Janissaries embrace their political influence, others mourn the loss of discipline. You get to watch both sides argue, sometimes during parade rehearsals, which really adds drama to synchronized turning drills. One side wants tradition, the other wants tax exemptions and kebab stipends. There's a constant humming tension, like someone's strumming a bass string of unrest. You learn to read whispers, one twitch of an eyebrow. That means the Grand Vizier's cousin is angling for a new post. A casual mention of bad harvests. Brace for riots. Your signature is now worth something. More than once, someone slides you a coin or a favor, hoping for a letter of support or a look the other way nod. A quirky tidbit. Some Janissaries were known to run neighborhood watch programs that suspiciously resembled protection rackets. Nice market stall you got there. Be a shame if we didn't guard it. You begin to understand why power is addictive. You can influence grain prices just by refusing to unload cargo. You can hint that a magistrate is slow with forms and watch his week collapse. You are that powerful. And yet, you still share a bunk bed with a man who flosses with chicken sinew. Historians still argue whether the Janissaries' political meddling was an organic evolution of their role or the result of lax recruitment policies and unchecked expansion. Either way, you're living inside the outcome and trying to keep your head literally attached. Each morning begins with drum rolls, not just for training, but for declarations, edicts, tax increases, or the occasional "we're revolting again, see you in Topkapi Palace." You iron your sash, you nod to the guards, and you pretend, just for today, that your power doesn't make you a target. You fall asleep with your boots still on. Tomorrow might bring a new law, a new leader, or a fire in the treasury. But for tonight, you're the Janissary, with enough influence to order extra stew, which is, arguably, the highest form of political power. The drums are louder now, not ceremonial, not decorative. These are the drums of dissent, the heartbeat of rebellion, and you're no longer just hearing them, you're marching to them. Welcome to the part of your Janissary experience where you become a walking paradox. Elite soldier, defender of the empire, and now part-time insurrectionist. You wake up one morning and half your barracks is muttering about a tax on tobacco, or bread, or something vaguely offensive to their moustaches. The other half is sharpening swords just in case the muttering turns into something that requires shouting. You do the only sensible thing, pretend to stretch while inching toward the nearest exit. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Janissaries rebelled multiple times between the 16th and 19th centuries, sometimes over wages, sometimes over reforms, and occasionally over what looks suspiciously like boredom with authority. They weren't subtle about it. They stormed palaces, overthrew sultans, and lit entire neighborhoods on fire just to make a point. It was the Ottoman equivalent of leaving a strongly worded Yelp review, except with torches. You don't have a choice. When your company votes to rebel, it's not a discussion, it's choreography. You move with them, or you move against them, and that second option has the lifespan of a mayfly in a frying pan. So you shout slogans, you wave a banner, and you privately wonder how much damage one elite military corps can do in an afternoon. Spoiler, a lot. And here's the kicker, the quirky tidbit of the day. During one 17th century rebellion, the Janissaries didn't just riot. They brought their own puppets to mock court officials. That's right, glorified sock theatre. Nothing says revolution like stabbing someone in the metaphorical heart and mocking their nose with felt. Things escalate. Always. The kitchen staff joins in, followed by the porters and even the scribes, who honestly just want a raise and some ink that doesn't smell like goat sweat. You're swept along, shouting demands you only half understand, like "down with the foreign vizier," even though you're fairly certain he's from Bursa. Historians still argue whether these revolts were coordinated movements against corruption or just explosions of poorly managed internal resentment. Either way, you're now flipping over carts and dodging arrows with emotional expression energy. One moment, you're tossing a tax ledger into a fountain. The next, you're pausing to rescue a cat from the same fountain because you're not a monster. At some point, the palace sends negotiators. They're sweating through silk, carrying trays of dates, hoping flattery can untangle fury. It works, mostly. The rebellion concludes with promises of reform, which will definitely last until next spring at most. And just like that, you're back in formation, polishing your boots like nothing happened. Passive-aggressive obedience is practically a lifestyle. The air feels different after a revolt, heavier. You walk through camp with your helmet just a little tighter. Everyone knows who said what, who shouted too loud, who stayed too quiet. It's a brotherhood of mistrust, held together by shared meals and deeply repressed guilt. You write a letter to your family, nothing specific, just that things are fine. You leave out the part about mock puppetry and burning effigies, because honestly, it would take too long to explain, and the pigeons are getting picky. And now, of course, we come to the end, though not the end of your Janissary service. That would require retirement, and let's be honest, That's not really an option unless you've made it through 3 sultans, 1 assassination attempt, and still somehow have all your toes. You don't leave the Janissaries, you fade from them. Or they forget you, or they fold you into a ledger marked Other. You spend your final years like furniture in a room no one enters. Still polished, still present, but mostly decorative. Your old uniform sits folded in a chest, visited only by moths and that one overly respectful nephew who believes you're very important but has no idea why. You tell him stories, safe ones, parades, ceremonies, not the puppet revolts or the time someone tried to assassinate a watermelon as practice. There's your mainstream historical fact. Late career Janissaries often held significant influence in court politics or retired into ceremonial positions, but many were quietly sidelined, given minor posts that looked impressive but were as hollow as an empty helmet. Historians still argue whether this sidelining was a form of reward or exile. Either way, it feels less like being honored and more like being pre-labeled for a museum. You spend long days at your small estate or stipend-fed apartment, sipping bitter coffee and staring at the walls like they owe you an explanation. There's a painting, badly done, of a sultan you once guarded. You try to remember if you liked him. It's hard to tell. They all wore the same hat. Your body aches in fascinating new places, not the ones from sword wounds or horseback bruises. No, these are more refined pains. The legacy of marching over Anatolian ridgelines and kneeling too long in Ottoman prayer halls. You cough, and it sounds like history clearing its throat. But there's one quirky tidbit left for your bedside scroll. Some Janissaries in retirement became unofficial matchmakers, scribes, or coffee shop philosophers, dispensing semi-coherent wisdom over pipes and sugar cubes. You do the same, uninvited usually. Local boys ask you what war was like. You tell them war smells like feet and cabbage, and they leave disappointed. On moonless nights you dream in formation. You feel the pressure of armor against skin that is no longer young, no longer Janissary. You remember the cadence of steps, the exact distance between your shoulder and the next man's shield. It's like breathing. Still there, even now, long after the drums have faded. And you wonder, if your younger self could see you now, would he salute or sigh? The courtyard outside is quiet. Too quiet. Somewhere in the distance, someone plays a flute badly. It's the kind of sound that used to precede an ambush, but tonight it just means your neighbor's son is failing music again. And you, well, you let your eyelids sink like fortress gates. You've survived marching, drilling, revolting, obeying, disobeying, and the crushing weight of too much history in one fragile body. No one will carve your name into stone, but your footprints are all over an empire that no longer remembers its own anthem. So you rest now, not in defiance, not in fear, but in the soft, steady exhale of a soldier who has finally been dismissed.